All right, good morning, everybody. Today's Wednesday, January 8th. I'm John Weigell with Sara Friedman, and this is the Hustle Daily Show. Historians could potentially be the new rock stars right now. From book sales to podcasts to TV and movies, history is on a historic run right now in the media. The subject many of us were taught in school has seen quite a resurgence in recent years, but why is history in the limelight right now? We'll get to all that in a bit, but first, let's give you the news in business and tech. First today, in a blog post, this is everywhere today, all over most sites, CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced the end of third-party fact-checking in the US with a move toward a community notes model, kind of like the one that you see on X if you're on that platform. Meta is also making changes to its moderation content policies around political topics and doing away with the restrictions that limited the amount of political content on users' feeds. So, Sara, this is an interesting extension. We were talking a bit before the podcast about how politics and tech is becoming a little more intertwined as of late. What do you make of this development of the community notes feature and also doing away with political restrictions in posting?
Yeah, I think this is, as you said, the big story of the day, probably the week. And I think we'll keep seeing stories like this as social platforms figure out where they stand on these issues. This is a big reversal from Meta's previous attempts to kind of rein in misinformation and hate speech on the platform. In the video announcing the changes, Zuckerberg said, quote, "We're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms." So along with those changes you mentioned, Meta will stop enforcing content rules specifically about immigration and gender that are, quote, "out of touch with mainstream discourse." So yeah, this was a big announcement. It's rolling back a lot of kind of safeguards that the platform had implemented. I think it will drastically change many of our news feeds, whether we opt in or not. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. But it is, definitely a big announcement coming from Zuckerberg and Meta. And as we said, this community notes is already happening on X. So instead of fact-checking content from a third party, it's kind of up to the users to say if something's wrong or if they want more information. So it's a totally different way of moderating.
Yeah, it definitely is. This is all in addition as well to another change that Meta rolled out recently that was allowing AI accounts to take shape on Instagram and Facebook. So I think that this doesn't fall far from that initiative either. And I believe that the Meta platforms in the next year are going to look a lot different than they have previously.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think not every user will enjoy those changes. And I'm curious to see, new social networks sprouting up and how all of this shakes out.
Totally. From there, we move over to Getty. Getty Images is acquiring Shutterstock to form a $3.7 billion company. This big merger, which the company said will offer customers a larger catalog of photographs, videos, music, and 3D images, comes as visual content companies race to keep up with generative AI. Of course, Getty and Shutterstock are the big companies in the stock photo and video industry. So to see them combining to face AI will be interesting. And we go to Japan. If you're a smart Japanese Gen Z college student, your life is pretty good right about now. Japan's rapidly aging workforce has now forced some companies to recruit talent by any means necessary. And the means necessary here includes paying off student debt payments and subsidizing housing for younger talent. And finally, McDonald's is rolling out a new menu in U.S. restaurants this week. It's the biggest menu change in years. The McValue menu features John Cena, who else, as the face of its marketing campaign and offers more in-app exclusives and location-dependent food and drink deals. It's the latest attempt for McDonald's to lure back budget-conscious diners who feel like the chain has gotten too pricey, which it totally has. The average price of its menu items have climbed about 40% since 2019. The double quarter pounder, just don't do it. Get a double cheeseburger off the dollar menu.
Hey everybody, it's your host, John Weigell. If you love the insights HubSpot brings to your podcast feed, then you're going to love Marketplace Tech. This daily podcast keeps you up to speed about the latest in tech news and what it all means for the economy. With stories about AI regulation, the fight against misinformation, and the latest in crypto, Marketplace Tech is essential listening to understand the business behind innovation. Listen to Marketplace Tech wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, main story today. History was my favorite subject in school, but now it's gone from the classroom to mainstream media in a lot of ways. Ancient history has become a media goldmine, helping sell books and podcast listens alike. So, Sarah, before we get into the why this is happening, can you tell me about the moment history is happening in media currently?
Yeah, I mean, this is great news for you and all fellow history nerds. I think your interests are about to seem even cooler.
Yes, finally, we are part of something greater.
Yes, because history is going mainstream. People in the UK and Ireland spent more on history books in 2023 than any other year since 1998, according to Nielsen book data.
Wow.
And sales for ancient history books rose 67% between 2013 and 2023, while books on specific history subjects increased 70%. And despite a flat market for books in the US, the history niche has grown 6% in the last year, according to Circana data. And a first for an election year, the category actually outsold politics 2-1. So people are reading history books. They can't get enough.
Yeah, people are really getting back into history lately. I've kind of noticed this. Well, obviously my algorithm is skewed. Take it for what you will, but books recommended to me, articles recommended to me, especially when I walk in the Barnes and Nobles of the world, they're really pushing history books, and there seems to be a lot of people buying them up. What are some other ways that history is making an impact in maybe more like new media? Because books has always been a place for history, but I think it's expanded to other places now as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think newsletters for sure, which is the way that many people are consuming like most of their media these days. There's a newsletter by a Boston College history professor, Heather Cox Richardson, and it's one of Substack's most successful with 1.8 million subscribers.
Wow.
And then we all watched on TikTok the Roman Empire trend play out, which ended up with, I think, 85 million plus videos attached to it. And that was kind of the coming out of everyone saying that they actually think about history extremely often. So I think that was an indicator of this trend. But I think the big one is podcasts are just absolutely thriving with history.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I feel as though the celebrity-driven podcasts, of course, we talked about before, kind of in that 1% of podcasts that get all the viewership, the Kelsey brothers, Call Her Daddy. But history podcasts seem to be very highly visited as well, especially for having such a wide margin of topic base. And that's really exciting because history podcasts are not small in number either. So a lot of people are doing very well on there.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said so many times, the podcast industry is a really good one to thrive in. Nearly 70 million people listened to podcasts in 2023, a number estimated to reach 110 million by 2029. And there are history-centered shows like Hardcore History and The Rest is History, which see, 12.5 million downloads per month and frequently are at the top of the charts. These are beating out shows like This American Life, like this is big leagues we're talking. And Goalhanger, which produces The Rest is History, recently signed a deal with a Hollywood production company to develop TV shows and films based on the podcast. And the podcast hosts have performed in front of live audiences at sold out venues for thousands of seats across the world. So this is really becoming its whole own niche in the media industry. People are actually, standing in line to listen to shows about history with two podcast hosts discussing ancient history. So I think it's a really interesting kind of funny trend at this particular time.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think at this particular time history is doing so well? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm quite happy about it. But generally, like over the course of the past 10 years, it maybe hasn't been in the limelight so much. But now it is. What do you think is the reason for that?
Yeah, there's a Bloomberg piece on this, and I think they had some great guesses. I think on one hand, the population, as we know, is rapidly aging, and there will be, more people over 60 than ever before very soon. And I think that that population might be, increasingly interested in stories from the past. I think on the other hand, we're at a tipping point with AI and technology. And we've talked about this before, like this might actually push people towards the humanities and craving a little bit more of, art and history and writing and these things that can't be touched by AI or came before AI. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And lastly, fewer higher ed students are studying history. So while student enrollment in the UK increased by about 20% in the last 5 years, the number of students studying history fell 10%. Mm. And in the US, spring enrollment in undergraduate history classes fell 15% since 2019. So I think while it seems kind of at odds with what we're talking about here, I think that with the price of a college degree, there's a lot of pressure on young people who do choose to go to school to get a degree that sets them up for a really high-paying job.
Sure.
I think they're increasingly being pushed away from the humanities, whether it's art, history, and literature. So I think this is filling a gap there. This might be something that people are really interested in, but they feel like they can't dedicate their whole higher ed career to it. So that might also be a play.
Sure. I could totally see people getting into history as more of a hobby, something that they like to listen to rather than taking a course. Because, if you are a history major, not too many options await you that aren't being a historian or, teaching or even going to maybe law school. But yeah, I think maybe younger generations today are more interested in more applicable and high earning careers. So this all makes sense, but it also ladders into why maybe history is doing so well in the media because, for Gladiator 2's purposes, you have these blockbuster movies, books, podcasts doing very well because there is such an interest that maybe people aren't getting in the classroom anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to get it from movies and just podcasts on your way to class. I think that's where people are getting their fix.
Yeah, good way to do it. Yeah, Gladiator 2 it may not be historically accurate, but the podcast might be better.
Maybe.
Okay, and that'll do it for us today. Thanks everybody for tuning into the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor is Robert Hartwig. Our executive producer is Darren Clark. We've got a ton more tech and business coverage in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, go get signed up this year at thehustle.co/email and throw us a follow on Instagram at The Hustle Daily. We'll see you tomorrow.